Yeah. So if you go, so you can minimize this page, and then yeah, this is the most annoying thing. The link is go down a bit. Make this larger. Yeah, little tiny thing there. Links. Google.
Which one do we want though? Do we want the
Either one. It's just, like yeah, it works the same.
Okay.
All right. Is there any way to see if it's working, the Google Hangouts?
I can check right now.
Great. Okay. So I guess we can get started. So first thing is I want to get started just to get an idea of your background. So who here, put up your hand if you know what an IDE is, or an integrated development environment. All right, about half. How about if you've used RStudio before? Excellent. Okay. Have you used a debugger before? Oh, perfect. Yeah. Okay. And yeah, so that's the other way I like to do it, is like raise your hand corresponding to your confidence in using a debugger. And okay, who's written an R function before? Excellent. Oh, you're all so good. And who wants to learn about debugging? Yay! All right, excellent. I'd like to see it. So first thing I'd like you to do is there are two files that we're going to be using today. Oh, yep. Oh, yeah, look at that. Okay. Well, I don't know that there's an easy way to...
You make a new notepad, I guess.
Yeah, okay.
Copy everything.
Well, this is going to be... Yeah. Okay, well, let's do that.
No connection that is working.
Okay. And we have this new setup with that has a few smaller, like a few fewer seats. But if someone else comes in, feel free to move about, or if we need to add in another table, we can. Yeah, that's right. It's a linked list, so we can easily expand it. Yeah, exactly. We want to encourage collaboration here, especially with debugging. Okay, so I'm just going to update it here as well. Okay, great. So again, I would like you to download those two files that are linked to both on the Etherpad and this work? No, sorry, the links on the Etherpad are wrong.
I'm excited to learn what Traceback does.
Yeah. Oh, I know. Okay, so just do this. And I'd also like you to open up RStudio and open up a new project. And load those two files into your project. I will do in a minute. Does everyone know what PackRat is? when it asks you, do you want to use packrat? So when you're making a new project, initializing or using packrat will tell RStudio to take care of all of your dependencies for you. So whenever you move that project around or you publish that project, it will keep track of what dependencies you've installed. So it'll, if you're working on multiple computers, it's a nice thing to use.
So how did you set that up?
Oh yeah, so you go File, and then New Project,
Yeah.
and then New Directory, and Empty Project, and then it's just this little tick box here, which it used to ask you about, but now I think it believes that just everyone wants to use it. But if you're wondering what that means, that's what it means. Okay, so we have our new project. Now I'm going to bring in the two files, which let's do this. Let's see. Oh. So you can just use the open file under File, Open File, to open the files that you downloaded. And then they should open up. We're going to start with print triangle. Okay. Okay, does everyone have print triangle open in RStudio? Yeah, good color will be yellow. Yellow for the sun. If everything is good and sunny, put up your yellow.
Blue if you're down.
Blue, yeah, blue if you're feeling blue. Yellow, yellow, yellow. Oh my god, red is, I don't know. Red is sunset, maybe? Are you falling asleep? Okay, great. So, so the first thing we want to do is, so some of you don't know what an IDE is. An IDE is an integrated development environment, and RStudio is an example of an IDE. IDEs come in many, many flavors. Lots of programming languages have IDEs. There are IDEs that are not specific to programming languages, and there are ones that are. So for example, RStudio is for R, whereas some other IDEs like Eclipse can handle more than one programming language. And IDEs are really made to make your life easier as a programmer. They are designed by programmers for programmers. As such, sometimes they are not very usable, but for the most part, they make your life a lot easier. And so I encourage you, if you're doing any programming, to check if there's an IDE available for your programming language of choice and see if you can use it. So typically, there are three main components in an IDE. There's the code editor, building tools, which we probably won't talk about today, and a debugger, which hopefully will become a good friend of yours. So in general, RStudio, so there are four windows that open up when you start a new project. This up here is your script viewer. So this is a really good place to write your code. Down here is the console. This is a really dangerous place to write your code, but you can do it if you're feeling risky. The problem here is that anything you write isn't saved. Up here, you can write some code, and this is actually just a text editor. So anything you write up here, you can save very easily. Down here, you're writing directly into the console, so not easily saved. But you can get it back by looking over here at the history. This will show you anything that you've entered into the console. So if I say print hello, it'll show up in my history. The other tab up here is environment. This shows you the variables that you have. So if I make my fruit is a watermelon, then it'll show over here, fruit, watermelon, my values. Okay, and then down here is a sort of all-purpose tab that shows you the files in your project. It'll show you plots if you make them. It's a package manager, help, which is really, really useful, and viewer, which I've never used. And you can move around these windows. You can minimize them. So for now, we're going to minimize this guy on the bottom right, so because we don't need him. And let's see. And yeah, so that's those are the main windows. Okay, so let's get right into debugging. So if you want to run this triangle program, let's say that we're working on an art project together, and my job was to make something that would build triangles. You're doing squares. So I've sent you my code, and I say, okay, you know, I just finished it at midnight, but here it is. I know we have to submit it tomorrow. But I'm going to the island and I'm not going to have any internet access. So go ahead and submit it for us. Okay. Okay. Thanks. Bye. So you get this code from me and you're like, okay, well, let's see what it does. So one way to run this code, well, I guess first is a good idea to always look at the code. So what does this do? We have a nice comments. So that's good. It says that it's supposed to print a right angle triangle of height, triangle height with a right angle at the top left. And then we have a nice little at param here, which tells us that the triangle height is an integer and it should be the height of the triangle. So who here has seen this kind of formatted commenting before? No? Okay, so the nice thing about this kind of formatted commenting is that later on, if you want to make a package out of your code, there are automatic scripts that will turn this commenting into an R markdown or a markdown that describes all of the functions in your package. So for example, if we were to look at this, where I have ggplot open right now, there's, let's see, female ones. Okay, maybe this is a bit of a, anyway, this is a hard example, but these headings will be derived from these special words. And so along with at param, you can also have, if you type in at, there you'll see a bunch of things come up. So you could have different names. One nice one is example. So you could put, oops, example. And then we could say print triangle and then free. An example how to use the program. I really like having those as a user. So this is one way that you can make comments. And when you're doing, if you put this little apostrophe after the hash symbol, then you'll keep getting more comments. You don't have to type the hash in every time. So that's comment. So now we know what this function is supposed to do. So we look at it. Yeah.
Is there any, where can I find out like more information on how to do comments like that? Or can I see it?
Yeah, maybe I'll look up a link and we can put it on the Etherpad. So then we look at the code and we say, okay, I'm not going to deal with what's inside for now, but I see that it's a function, it takes a number, so I'm just going to go ahead and try to call it. So the first thing I want to do is just get it into the memory, so we can do Control-Enter to make sure R knows about this, and then we can press Control-Enter, print triangle. Let's see what happens. So yeah, that doesn't really look like a triangle. It looks like part of a triangle, maybe. Now, maybe it's obvious for you to look at this code and say like, oh, well, obviously I know what happened here. But let's pretend that it's 1 in the morning and we really don't know what's going on. So one way we could do this is to put in print statements everywhere. But that sounds like a lot of work. So let's try using the debugger instead. So the first thing we want to do is to add what is called a breakpoint. A breakpoint tells R to put on the brakes, just to pause whatever it's doing. So we can put in a breakpoint by clicking next to the line number. So if you click next to 8, for example, that puts in a breakpoint. And you can see up here the text says that breakpoints will be activated when this file is sourced. So another way to run this file is to click source up here in the top right. So let's click source and see what happens. So now we are in debug mode. So you'll notice that a bunch of stuff changed in your RStudio, and we're just going to go through what has changed. So down here, these are the debugger controls, which we'll talk about in a second. And up here is the traceback. So what the debugger really does is it tells R, okay, go ahead and start executing print triangle 3. But I need to know what's going on while you're running it. So let me come into the code with you, and we can go through it together. And so it says, okay, and it says, let's hold hands as we go through this code. So what it's doing now, this little arrow, is R telling you where it is in the code. So it's saying that it's about to run this stars command. So if we, let's see, let's just make some space over here. Okay, so if we see over here on the right, in values, we don't actually have this stars thing yet. And this traceback tells us where we are in the code stack. So this tells us that we started over here at print triangle line R18, so down here. And when you click on it, it highlights it in your console, in your script. And then when you called print triangle, what R did is then it went into that function, print triangle, and stopped at line 8 because you told it to stop at line 8. So that's where we are. Now, if we want to move along through the code, we use these buttons down here. Next means simply execute this command and go to the next line. So we can click that. And then we see, okay, so we have stars. It made stars up here, so that's great. And it's moved on to the next line, which is actually this big loop, which is all highlighted. And yes, loops are not the best thing to use in R, but they're really nice for debugging. So we're just going to go with it. And okay, so this all looks fine, right? Starting off our function with an empty string seems okay. So the next thing we're going to do is we'll just click next again. So this takes us into the loop, and we can see now that I is 1, stars is still blank, and triangle height is still 3. We just keep clicking next. You'll see that stars is changing. Now we have J that showed up, right? So our inner loop here is J, and we can just keep watching that stars grow. Look at it go. Okay, and then we click one more time. Now I is 2, so this is the second running of our code, and we're seeing, yeah, it just keeps growing. So, and if you click next enough times, then the function ends, and it throws you back into your normal setting for RStudio. So what we saw was that stars wasn't acting the way we thought it would. So I'm going to give you a second now and think about how you would want to fix this error. Take down your yellow stickies and put them back up when you're ready. Or if you're having trouble with the debugger, feel free to run it again just using that next command. Then I'll come over and help you out. Yes, a triangle with the angle at the top left. So what I wanted to do is to print something. No, just like this.
The width and the height are the same.
Yeah. Okay. So a right angle triangle. Height 3. And actually, it's going to happen. It's going to look like this when it prints it. All right, is everyone feeling comfortable with the debugger itself? Because we don't, we'll just go through how to fix the code in a second, because that's not really what we're doing today. But we can look at but is everyone feeling comfortable so far with the debugger? Does anyone have any questions so far about what we've seen with the debugger? Yeah. So, okay, yeah. So the function of it is to help you figure out what's going on. So one way that we could figure out what's going on here is to put in some print statements, right? So actually, here's a question. So maybe I should have started with this. What do you guys use to debug your code? How do you do it? Sorry. No, you just, well, so do you write code? Yeah, a little bit. So do you ever make mistakes in the code? Do you make mistakes? Like when you, yeah. So how do you, so maybe I should have started with that. What does it mean to debug code? It just means that you made a mistake and you're just trying to fix it. So programmers love fancy words, so we say debug instead of just fixing our mistakes. Maybe we don't like the word mistake. So so what we're really trying to do here is to figure out different ways to identify what mistake we made in our code, and then how to fix it. Okay. Right? Well, I just didn't know what the mistake was. Okay. Yeah. So I guess it just didn't exactly conform to the what was described in the comments, right at the top. So what we want to do is to so one way that we could actually, hold on. So everyone else, what are other ways that you fix mistakes in your code? Print statements, nice. Anything else?
Sometimes I walk through, like for a for loop, I'll walk through and say I equals 1 and then go through the code. Exactly what this debugger is doing, and then I equals 2 and see what happens there, I equals 3.
Yeah, exactly. So you want to step through the code. And one way to do that is to explicitly tell the code what to do. So when I equals 1. Another way is to watch what it's doing by using print statements. So we could do like print I, and then we could do print J. But the problem is that you have to know what to print too. And if you're not comfortable with the code, you haven't really looked at it too much, you might just print I and J. So if we just did that and press source, which will run it, so we see, okay, so I is 1 and 1, and then 2, and then 3. So this is, so we should probably, then you have to get into doing things like, okay, I guess I have to put some better printing because I don't know which is my I and which is my J. Anyway, it gets to be really slow. So, as you can see,
the thing, I guess, is you just start editing your code, and like I'm pretty sure I've run into the situation where I edited my code and I forgot to remove something, or like I forced a variable to get a certain value, and then I forget it later on. And I introduce new bugs.
Whereby later on is like 30 seconds later.
So that's one way with print statements, but this doesn't actually, so this seems to be working, sort of fine. But if I then put in maybe a print statement for stars, maybe you'll see what's going on. But you have to know, you have to write these basically 4 lines of code to do all this printing, and then you can see, maybe you'll understand from the print statements. But for me, it's easier to use the debugger. So let's go back. Did I do it? Yeah. And then you can delete print statements, and maybe you delete code as you're doing it. No, it's okay. And then, or you forget, you get another bug, and then you have to write them all back in again. So print statements are very useful, but painful sometimes. So let's go back to the debugger. So some of you figured out what the issue was. And the issue was that stars is up here, and we don't reset it every time we go into our loop. So I think if we put it here, that's where we want it. So we got our triangle. Yeah.
I just have a quick question. My debugger or my console is now in a state where there's just like a plus on the left, and like I can't
Oh yeah, okay, so what's happening is there's probably, yeah, an unpublished quote in there. So, or you can type escape.
Okay, cool. Thanks.
Sorry?
I think I missed that in the debugger as well.
I'm sorry. Oh, you're stuck in the debugger? Yeah, that's fun. You get stuck in the debugger. And you can also, you can also debug while you're debugging, and you can get into this infinite loop of debuggers, and then you just have to click and stop to get out. It can be exciting.
So that's the debugger,
Yeah,
right?
that's great. And then,
But I don't see any like sound there because I stopped it.
so when you're in the debugger, don't worry about it too much. It's not going to change your code. So that's the other nice thing. Once you're in the debugger, you can do all sorts of stuff, and it won't, unless you actually type in your script, it's not going to mess with your code. So it's nice and safe that way. So if, just a second. So if you're in your situation and you're in the debugger, and maybe we can do, let's do source again. And now I'm in like kind of a crazy debugging source. Okay, so there are two things you can do when you're like, oh, I have no idea what's going on. You can either click continue, and this is going to just execute the rest of the code without bugging you, right? So you don't have to go next, 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 next. You can just press continue. But if you just did what I did, where you're in like a crazy number, then you can keep pressing continue a bunch of times, or you can press stop a bunch of times. There we go. Just keep pressing stop. Just like Control C, sometimes you have to hit it a bunch of times. Just keep pressing stop or continue, and eventually you'll get out. And nothing will change with your code, so it's pretty safe. Even if you do something fun like let's get into the debugger. So you can actually also change things. So let's go stars, and writing in the console down here, you can say, I don't know, let's put some X's in there. And then you tell it to continue. All right, and so since my breakpoint is here, every time I do this loop, it's going to hit this breakpoint. So what continue does is says, keep running the code until you hit a breakpoint. And because my breakpoint is in the loop, I'm hitting the breakpoint over and over and over again. I can get rid of the breakpoint by clicking on the arrow. Okay, let's see. There. So let's see. So you can put in 2 breakpoints, for example, source, and then continue. And you can see here now I'm at this breakpoint. And you couldn't see it before because the arrow is at the same place as the dot. But if you click on the dot, it'll disappear, and now your breakpoint is gone. So you can remove breakpoints while you're in the debugging mode. And then if you click once on the arrow, the invisible red dot will disappear. And then we're in the loop, so you just keep pressing continue, or you press stop, and you're out. Okay, so that's one way to use the debugger. Now we're going to look at another way. So before that, does anyone have any questions about this? No? Okay, great. So let's open Crazify. And here we have some functions that don't have comments, so that's not a good idea. But they are named pretty well. So reverse letters, this function takes a word and it reverses the letters in that word. Reverse words, it takes a phrase and it reverses the words in the phrase. And Crazify is supposed to, let's add some comments here. So do you remember how to add the fancy comments? What goes after the hash? Single quote, yeah, that's right. Okay, so this is supposed to reverse the order of words in a phrase and the order of letters in every word. Okay, and what could we add to this as one of those fancy comments? Perfect, yeah, example. So as an example, we can do crazify. This is silly. Okay. Anyone else with a special kind of parameter you could say?
Can I just ask a question?
Yeah.
So when you do the add example, crazify, this is silly,
Mhm.
is it actually going to run that function and put the
No.
output if it was going into an R Markdown document? Like into a package?
No, it
Okay.
shouldn't. So it'll just have like
It's just an
if we
example of how you would call it, and you would have to give the example of an output.
exactly, yeah. So let's see. I don't know, t-test. Maybe this will have one.
See the line with the greater than sign like this,
Yeah.
and you write some code, and then you write right below it the expected output. You can actually run tests.
What?
Yeah,
That's awesome.
yeah. Doc tests, I think is what they're called.
Let's see. Yeah, so they should come up in this usage. So you can play around with it. There's also examples, and then you can do this on the next line, and then you could add in a few more.
Okay.
So we have examples. So the other thing that we usually like to add, since this has a parameter, let's add a param. Phrase is going to be a string. A string of words. Okay, great. So now we have our comments in there. Let's see what it works. So right here we have crazify being called on a phrase. So if we click source, that should run. And we get an error. But it got an error statement, so we should be able to easily figure out what's going on here, right? Error in string split word, non-character argument. Well, that's not very useful, is it? So there's a few things we can do from here. You'll see that RStudio is nice in that it gives us these two buttons on the far right. If we click on show traceback, the first thing it'll do is show us where it encountered the error. So here, so we start out at the source. So this is in this crazify document, and then a bunch of stuff, which I don't understand, but that's okay. Just skim to where you start to understand things, which is for me at line 5 up here, where it says crazify, here I am. So, okay, yeah, that's what I called here. So that's at line 30. And then, so what happened is we called crazify, so it went up here. It started running stuff and everything was fine until it hit line 25. So here at this reverse letters. Then this is telling us that it called reverse letters. And if we look up at reverse letters, it's up here. That's our function that we have. So, and in reverse letters, everything was fine until it hit line 3. So if you look at the top of your stack, this is where the error actually occurred. So what we can do now is put a breakpoint here and then run it again and see what's going on. So let's do that. And we're now in the debugger again, and the traceback will show us that we are in reverse letters, right, at line 3, called by crazify from line 25. And we can see that this word up here just says vec I, which isn't very useful. So another way we can try to see what's going on here is if we type word down here, and it shows us what word is. And word here is the parameter, right, that was passed to reverse letters by crazify. And what we can see here is that it's a list, right? And string split, if we type in, I wonder if this will work, string split, it expects See, this is an example where let's check out the help to see what string split expects. String split X should be a character vector, and we're giving it a list. So that's a problem. So there's a few ways to fix this. The easiest way, so now we figured out the problem, right? So we can either click continue or stop with our with the debugger. So we can just go continue, and then we're back in our normal environment. And then we can fix this by adding on line 23 unlist. There's a number of ways to fix this. This is the fastest so that we can move on to the next thing where you're going to start debugging. So if we add unlist on line 23, then that takes this list and says, I don't want a list, I want a vector. Give me a vector. And then unlist will give you a vector. So if we source this again, oh, our breakpoint is still there. So let's click stop and then remove our breakpoint, click source again, and then it worked. Here, Crazify. If we just do Crazify itself, and it worked, right? The words are reversed and the letters are reversed. So any questions? You have a question, Dan? Oh, yeah, sorry, no problem. So on line 23 of crazify.r, we added this unlist here around string split. So string split takes a character and then it gives you back a list of the parts of that character, vector, or string, I guess, split by the second parameter. So we're just adding unlist to say, I don't want a list, I want a vector. Yeah, so that's a really good point. When you're fixing errors, the errors aren't always caused by where the error is thrown, right? So that's another reason why just getting an error that says string split word non-character argument, that doesn't help us very much. So so you need to really go into the code and see what's going on. We know that the error was here, but we could fix it here. Let's see what happens. Oh, but if we fix it there, we also use the vector down here. So you could fix it here to expect a list. That's another thing you could do. So we could change this function to expect a list instead of a vector. But right now, another example of why having documentation is so important, let's go at param and say that the word is a list, or no, is not a list, is a vector of characters, aka a string. So there are lots of ways to fix bugs, right? You could also, you're absolutely right, we could also fix it up here. I just want to fix that just so we can now move on to you guys using a debugger. Yeah.
So when I run into debug and I rerun with debug, there's a source view that shows up. Do you ever use that, or do you just
the source? Sorry, say that again.
So whenever I run, when I do rerun with debug,
yeah,
I have a source view that shows up, but like, I assume it's like the function definition.
Yeah. Okay. Let's see. Yeah, I think I know what you're talking about. That's kind of a good thing to go over. So let's do this again. So I just updated Crazify to remove the fix, and then I put it in, and then I get this error again. So that's one we were seeing. If we click rerun with debug, yeah. So what this has actually done, so rerun with debug what it's doing is it puts in a breakpoint for you automatically where the error happened. And what actually happened was that in this case, this traceback is telling us that string split was where the error happened, but actually the error was thrown inside string split.
I didn't know that it was linked with the traceback. Okay,
Yeah. So it shows you, so if you click here at reverse letters, it'll pop you back to your function, and you can follow the traceback up and down throughout. And actually, this is sort of new in the latest versions of R. So I guess from maybe a year ago, that you actually have the functions for string split. You have the code that isn't compiled in binary, so you can look at what it does theoretically. Although this one is not. Well, as character fix. Yeah, exactly. So this isn't very useful. But always use this traceback to get back to where things start look like they make sense. So here, word, right, we're back where we are. There's another, I'm just going to finish talking about the other two buttons in the debugger. So this is called step in. So we've been using next to just go next, 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 next. But if we wanted to step into a function, oh, let's do this here. Okay, so let's stop. So stop everything. Let's go back to Crazify line 22, put a breakpoint right next to line 22, and then click source. Okay, now we're in the debugger and we're at line 22. Now, reverse words is a function that we defined right up here, right? And as far as we know, it's fine. There's nothing wrong with it. But so we could just click next, and that will define reverse phrase and move on. So if we do that, so you can see here phrase is here I am. We go next, reverse phrase shows up. Am I here? Okay, so that's one thing we could do. Now let's press stop and then press source again. The other thing we could do is if we wanted to investigate what's going on in reverse words, we could use this second button, which is called the step into function button. And if we click that, it will take us into reverse words. And then we can go through what's inside reverse words.
So it's basically like inception of the functions.
Yes. And you can, this button just executes the rest of this function. So if we realize, okay, actually reverse words is fine, I can click this and it'll hop me back to Crazify. If we clicked continue, it would have just finished running until we hit the error. So that's those two middle buttons that don't get names because they're not as useful as the buttons with names. Okay, so continue, I think we're done. So right, let's put in our fix again. So that's line 23. I want to do unsplit, no, unlist. And then let's get rid of our breakpoint and click source again and run this Crazify. Here I am. Okay, so that works. Now, challenge. So if you scroll down to line 32, we're going to try to confuse our customers. So there's this function down here that has been commented nicely, and what it's supposed to do is it takes a menu, which is a data frame where one column is the name of the food and the second column is the description. And it's supposed to print a crazified version of the descriptions, but not the titles. So you have an example here of what the output should look like on line 36 through 38. And so what I want you to do is go ahead and uncomment the lines on line 53 and 54 and try and run those and see if you run into some errors, and try using the debugger to fix those errors. And so everyone take down your stickies, and when you're done, put up your stickies. And if you notice that your sticky is up and other people's aren't, feel free to go over and say hi and see if they want any help. And if you're not really comfortable with R, you may not figure out these errors. It's really difficult to write errors that are that show the debugger but are also obvious. So just give it a few minutes of trying, and then the real goal here is for you to get comfortable with the debugger. So basically make sure you do what you can to play around the debugger. Try to get into a state where you don't understand while everyone is here and can help you out.
Yeah, so what happened here is that we got an error. Right? So when R tries to do something and it can't in one of its functions, it throws an error. And you can make R throw errors by just typing an error and then filling the error and then throw an error.
One thing I noticed in the menu debug, there's some menu on error, and that might sometimes you'll force it to break the code, otherwise it'll just do error inspection. So there's I don't know what that is.
So there are other ways to use debugging in R. There's a debug function and a browse function, and I might talk about those, but probably not today. There are some links on the in the notes that you can look at if you want to use those, but I find that the debugger is more useful, so I would recommend using that. It doesn't give you the same thing. Yeah. Yeah, you can. So the other way you can do it is if you see that error, you can look at, okay, where did I use Traceback and yes, put a breakpoint there. And also you can just step through your code until it hits an error, and then you'll know where the error was.
Maybe beyond the scope of the tutorial, but is there any way to annotate types in R? It seems like a lot of this is just like, oh, just
I know, right?
you just wrote down what the types were.
So when you mean types, are you talking about like an object, or?
Yeah, just
You mean like specify the parameters like int, string?
yeah. So does this expect? This
Yeah. No, I see what you're talking about. Yeah. No, no, because our. Oh yeah, you could, right. Yeah, it's not like Java where you could put like expects an int or something. But yeah, you're right. Assertions would be a good way to do it. Yep.
Maybe. Do we have any? Oh, does it work? Right? Well, actually, let's run source. Just click source. Yeah, I just
But,
said to
yeah.
And the debugger is actually new in RStudio. Maybe a year and a half ago, they didn't have a debugger.
So I guess there are still some issues, but it's infinitely better to have a debugger than not to.
There's this website online that has an inception button that plays the inception sound.
Oh yeah, well, perfect.
So like,
You
or
just
wanna
have
make
that on, like, that's constantly open, right?
Yeah, it's my ringtone when my mom texts me.
Oh, perfect. Okay, so I'll stop you now, and let's just wrap up. Don't worry if you didn't figure it out. The point of the thing was to use the debugger. So
Can you walk us through how you would
Yeah.
solve it?
for sure. So let's see. Right. So so first of all, I get a print statement for my menu, so I know what it looks like. Okay, and then I get this error. So I probably do show traceback to see what's going on. So reverse words. Okay, let's see. Okay, so let's rerun with debug. And then, like we were saying before, you get into this strange place, but let's back up a bit and go away. Okay, let's see. Okay, so I'm here and I see that in Crazify, I'm expecting phrase, which is a string of words, which is a silly thing to say. This isn't a vector of strings. And I see that what I'm getting actually is a factor with 2 levels. So if I type in phrase, oh, come on. Oh, right. Okay. So what happened is I'm because I didn't set my own breakpoint, it just took me to where it wants to be. So right now I'm in phrase here, which doesn't exist, right? In this environment.
I guess it's X there.
Yeah, exactly.
What you pass the function.
Exactly. Yeah. So that's exactly right.
So we pass that whole thing into the function.
Yes.
So it never exits.
Yeah, that's right. So here, reverse words, or phrase. Where were we? Okay. So I don't really like using that version. That's the jump into the code. I prefer to figure it out myself. So I like to use put in my own breakpoints instead of saying rerun with debug. It's up to you. But I want to go rerun with debug on. So the issue was basically at line 22. So let's see. Let's put a debugger. Put a breakpoint there. And then run my command again. Oh, right. So here it says breakpoints will be activated when this file is sourced. So this is really annoying, but I don't know how to get around it, which is why I had the commands down here commented out before. So I'm going to comment out this command. It's fine if you leave it in, but you have to source the whole document to get your breakpoints activated. So let's click source, and now it'll let me get into the debugger. And if I go phrase, then I see that I'm getting this factor with 2 levels. And what I'm expecting in reverse words is, right, I'm running string split. So from what we figured out before, string split expects a string, not a factor. So I know that I'm passing it the wrong thing. And if I go back up to Crazify here, I'm passing in menu descriptions, and menu descriptions is down here, identified in my data frame. And this is where we can say, okay, well, my data frame clearly has, let's see, this isn't being treated as just a vector, right? This is the tricky thing of using strings as factors. So we have to put strings as factors to false. So this is, again, something that you might not realize unless you were comfortable with R, that you need to put this in. But you will see that that the problem is because you're passing in factors. And then maybe with some Googling, you'd say factors, data frame, and it would come up with, hey, and a common thing that can happen is that you make a data frame and it interprets your strings as factors. So that's one change. So and you'll notice that I changed the code while the debugger is running. The debugger can get really mad at you for this because it knows what it's trying to do, and then if you change something above or below where you are in the code as R is running through it, it's not paying attention to what you've just done. And it makes the output of the debugger really, really strange. So I would say if you want to continue using the debugger after editing the code, don't. Just stop your debugger, fix it, run it again, or fix it and then stop your debugger and then run it again. Don't try to fix your code and then keep running the debugger. You can, but I don't advise it.
Do not attempt to repair your airplane.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, exactly. Okay, so we just fixed that. So now we have our strings as factors equal to false. So let's try running this again. I still have my breakpoint activated, so it caught me up here. But now if I go phrase, I have a vector of 2 strings. So was that what I was expecting? Let's see. Reverse words is supposed to take a phrase. Again, I don't have good commenting here, so it's really less than ideal. But what we can tell from this use of string split here is that it's really expecting just a vector of words. And I'm giving it a vector of words, but a vector of 2 separate words. So let's see what happens if I do it. Well, now 2 of these descriptions all at the same time. And so what I was seeing, if I run it with my breakpoint again, so let's just try it again. When I pass in phrase, let's see what phrase is. Passing in both of these things to reverse words. So it's just going to reverse all of them, which means that I'm probably calling crazify wrong, right? Because phrase is just supposed to be a vector of strings, and I'm giving it 2 vectors of strings, which it's treating as 1 vector because a vector of vector is a vector. So if we go back up to where I called crazify from, over here, I can see that I'm calling it on menu descriptions, which is this vector of 2 strings in my data frame. And this is not going to do it. So what I have to do instead is what I really wanted to do was to call crazify on each of these strings separately. So that's when I want to just do apply. And then crazify. Okay, and then I just changed my code again. So, well, let's see what happens, right? If I continue, see, it didn't really work because I changed it after the code had already run. But let's go source again. Oh, something's missing. Oh, that's why it's sapply. So adding sapply at line 46, and then calling crazify, which sapply runs crazify on each of the items in the vector separately instead of running them all as 1 vector. And if we source that, then my breakpoint is still active, so I get back into here. But if I type phrase, I can see that I only have 1 string now. And now I'm done with my breakpoint, so I can click the green arrow, which is hiding the red circle, and then continue. Oh, and I'm still in here for some reason. Oh, maybe I call, oh, right, I call crazyfy more than once. So if I do phrase again, look at that, it's the second phrase. Hooray. And if I do it again, then it exits and it prints what I was expecting. So don't worry too much about the R stuff. If that was, for once, the goal of today was not to fix the errors, but to look at how you would fix the errors. So don't worry if you didn't fix the errors, and don't worry if you didn't understand the errors, because the idea is that maybe now you will be at least a little more comfortable with using a debugger. It won't be shocking when it pops up, and hopefully you can use it. Are there any questions or issues with the debugger?
I have a question.
Yeah.
I got the first step right. For
Good job.
what you were doing. So you had an error with a, and you clicked on something to show the traceback of what went wrong.
Yes.
And then you picked a line kind of in the middle of the traceback to decide to go hunting. And so I'm wondering, sort of, if you have generic advice for intuition, because my intuition is always to go to the very root of the traceback.
Yeah.
Which is kind of ham-fisted. So.
Well, no, I think that is more getting to the root of the problem, literally, is trying to go to the lowest place. So that makes sense. Here, this isn't, so sometimes though, the lowest trace, let's see if we rerun with debug, yeah, so the lowest place where the error is might be here, which can tell you something if you want to, if you know what string split means and you can understand this code, that can be useful. I tend to start from my code, and then, because it's more likely that I have done something wrong. So I try to start where my code is, and also because I understand my code a lot more. So just looking at this will tell me a lot more than looking at the string split. So that's how I would do it. But certainly, if you're comfortable reading this kind of code, this would also tell you what's going on. Like Tiffany was saying, just putting in X here showed us that it was a factor instead of a string. Note there are no comments here, so it's a bit. Then you have to look up the comments separately, I guess, for string split. But good question. Any other questions or issues? No? Okay, great. Thanks, guys.